There we go. All right. So today we're going to go over anxiety, obsessive compulsive, and related disorders. See if I can get it to go full screen. No, there's a little sad face. We'll just stick with this then. All right. So when you guys think of anxiety, what comes to mind? What physical features, what mental features come to mind with anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorders? I mean, what do you think about? Overthinking. Okay. What else? Fight or flight responses. Absolutely. What else? What comes to mind when you think of OCD? Obsessive thoughts. Like what? What would be something that someone with OCD would do?
I watched a documentary on Netflix about this guy that just wants to do all he's ever think about.
That's a little obsessive. That's wild.
No, but he was like riding on the city bus and he was like, I just want to stab everyone.
I feel like that would be more socio or psychopath rather than OCD. He might have been obsessed with it, but I'm talking more about like checking your locks 15 times before you leave the house. Those kind of behaviors, not necessarily stabbing people on the bus, but these are. They have tics, meaning what? I think to an extent in the general population that we all have some obsessive behaviors, but what we're going to talk about today is when that becomes a problem. I think all of us have these things that we're just really obsessed about. This has to be this certain way. I don't like it to be moved. You know, this chair belongs here in the house. I don't want it to go anywhere else. But when it affects your daily occupation or your ability to interact with people and make social connections, that's when it becomes a disorder. Here is a little thing about anxiety. It says, I get nervous about everything. Sometimes I literally don't know why I'm anxious. I just am, and no one seems to understand that. That's the difference with anxiety, is it's kind of all the time or in places it's not appropriate. One thing I wanted to mention to you guys is it's normal to be anxious in certain experiences. Okay, you're going to want to know that. Why is that different? It's not normal to have it when it inhibits your daily functioning, okay? Anxiety is an emotion that serves an adaptive response to threatening or harmful stimuli. This is something that is completely natural. But when anxiety disorder is when it doesn't let you function in a day. Everyone clear on that? Cool. It will produce physiological responses like excessive sweating, rapid speech. Some people get shortness of breath. It depends on the how severe the anxiety is. OCD is related very closely to anxiety, but it is the preoccupation or a ritual that becomes excessive, persisting, and then it interferes with functioning. Being late to work every day because you have to go check the windows 15 times to make sure that they were locked, or you have this obsessive compulsive behavior that you have to have the bed made a certain way. You can't leave the house till it's done, and then you're late for that. And then you can't trust yourself that it was done correctly, so you go back and check it. Or you go make sure that the stove is off, 3 or 4 times before you leave. Like it's those kind of repetitive behaviors that interfere with daily functioning where you can't have any peace of mind. Okay? Got me? All right. So anxiety disorders, there's different ones that we're going to go through. They all share 2 underlying elements, okay? Excessive fear and then anxiety itself, okay? Anxiety itself, like I said, is natural. When you combine it with excessive fear, it makes that inability to participate in daily occupation, okay?
Wait,
I haven't started that one yet. Just an overview of all of these disorders. They all have 2 underlying elements, meaning excessive fear and anxiety. Those 2 combined make an anxiety disorder. Okay? All right, let's talk about separation anxiety. This is much more common in children, of course, but it can occur across the lifespan. This is an excessive fear or anxiety about separation from home or any kind of primary attachment figure. So a spouse, a parent, a caregiver, anything like that falls under separation anxiety. They have an excessive worry or fear about events that could keep them from being with their attachment figures. Children demonstrate this a lot when sleeping away from home. You know, they're the ones calling at 2 a.m, like faking being sick, those kind of things. Now, that doesn't mean you have a disorder, because I think like most kids do that, right? At some point. I know I did. But there is, when it becomes repetitive and it is saying that they can't sleep over anyone's house, it's always, then there might be some separation anxiety disorder there. When an adult experiences separation anxiety, it's more of like a panic, and it becomes very, even imagined separation. Like it's not even a thought. It's like they really think that it's going to happen. Okay. Good. All right. Selective mutism. That is the failure to speak in social situations, even when someone is called on you or it's warranted. So it's not just being quiet in certain situations. It's when like, hey, can you answer number 4 for me? And selected muted. They're just, but nope, not talking at all. Period. Okay. Children with this generally have normal language skills, and they can communicate non-verbally, but they very well might just not answer verbally or acting mute. Okay, cool. So a phobia. A phobia is marked by a huge fear or anxiety about a specific object or situation. There are so many phobias out there. Like it's just, HGTV magic. They make documentaries on this stuff all the time. There's people that have phobias of ketchup. There's, just so much random stuff you would never even think of that cause huge bouts of anxiety. What's up?
How would you distinguish between like phobia and say something that is just triggered by PTSD?
So PTSD we're going to talk about later. That's a stressor disorder. But so PTSD is from a certain situation or being reminded of a situation or something along those lines. A phobia itself is more of a fear of an object or a situation. It's a very specific thing. Okay. PTSD is not necessarily a fear as it is just a response. Okay.
Is phobia to an object byproduct of PTSD?
It could be, absolutely. It could absolutely be that. But I would venture to say that they're not going to say you have a phobia of it, more of a side effect of having PTSD. You know what I mean? So I would venture to say they're probably not going to diagnose, a phobia of fireworks, for, military with PTSD. They're just going to say that is a side effect of PTSD. Makes sense? And it depends on a certain situation, because PTSD is something that's hard to map, because people will experience PTSD from a lot of situations. We always tend to think of military with PTSD, but that is a really wide diagnosis. That goes from a lot of different cases and a lot of different experiences. But that's actually, I think, Tuesday's lecture, we're going to talk about PTSD. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Cool. All right, social anxiety. This is an intense fear of just social situations because they feel like they may be judged or scrutinized by other people. Some symptoms are blushing, trembling, sweating, stumbling over their words. Of course, their performance in social situations is going to be very, very hindered. They're going to avoid social situations in most instances. Next, you have panic disorder. This is where someone experiences unexpected panic attacks. A panic attack is a lot more than what people think it is. You get a lot of physiological symptoms from panic attacks. Shortness of breath, sweating, nausea, chest pain, trembling. To me, panic attacks resemble a lot of heart attacks. A lot of people will go to the hospital with panic attacks or with panic attacks thinking they're having heart attacks, because they can mimic eerily similar, the chest pains and stuff. A panic attack is an abrupt surge of fear that peaks within minutes and then has these physiological symptoms that I've just listed off to you guys. They often will start to have feelings during these panic attacks of depersonalization, like almost removing themselves from the situation, but they're still there. Does that make sense? Like derealizing the situation, like saying this literally can't be happening while they're having a panic attack. It's quite strange to see if you've never seen one or experienced it. It's a very terrifying experience for the individual and for the person because you don't know there's very little to do. One thing that you can help them with the derealization to help them come to terms with it is observe the surroundings. Like, hey, look, we are at home. There's your TV. There's a picture of your kids on the wall. There's the dog. Helping them familiarize themselves with the situation and their surroundings. That's just a little helpful, tidbit to help them bring them in. Doing this can kind of help change the behavior, but it's not necessarily going to pull them out of the panic attack. It really just takes time. There's not a thing like there's breathing techniques and stuff that you can help try to walk them through. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work. Okay, comfort, time, those kind of things are what help. Agoraphobia. This is a little bit separate from panic disorder, but it's very close. Says that many individuals with this eventually are diagnosed with panic disorder later. These people are scared of escaping situations, okay? Not being able to feel like if they go on this, here's an example, if they go on a cruise ship, they have nowhere, they would never do this, but if they go on a cruise ship, how are they going to escape? How are they going to get away if the boat goes down? Who's going to rescue them? Like, these are the things, these people that don't like to fly, they're going to drive themselves. They feel like they have more control. Some of the situations that they're probably going to avoid is using public transportation, being in open places, being in enclosed places, standing in line and being in a crowd, and being outside of the home alone. This is just an intense fear that something is going to go wrong and they're not going to have any control over it. It can get so severe that the patient will just literally not leave home. They'll just be like, I am safer at home. I'm locking myself in. I can't help what happens when I'm out at the store or if I drive down the road. I'm better off here. I can control this. And then you have generalized anxiety disorder. You'll often hear people say GAD, G-A-D. This is just a general fear overview of everyday life circumstances, just overall anxious. This is the most common diagnosed anxiety disorder. This is the one most people think about. It becomes, again, a disorder when it interferes with daily life and daily actions. It really depends, though, what people are going to worry about. So at each age, people are diagnosed with anxiety disorder. It's not something that, like, you have to wait till you're 18. Like, there's people that are diagnosed with anxiety very early on. Some of those instances are very different. Like, what causes a child anxiety is very, very different than what causes an adult anxiety. And that's what that's what goes a lot into being able to diagnose these. Is it just something that generally stresses kids out? Or is it something, that generally stresses an adult out? Or is it something that's like an abnormal kind of physiological and anxious response? Again, I can't tell you guys enough. Anxiety is normal. When it interferes with daily life, it becomes abnormal. Okay? All right. So let's talk about obsessive compulsive and related disorders. They differ in different features of being diagnosed, but they all present with some form of anxiety. They all have obsessive thoughts, compulsive behaviors. Obsessions themselves are defined as recurrent and persistent thoughts. Compulsions are repetitive behaviors. Okay? Obsessions, I'm going to say this again because it may be important. I don't know, maybe. That obsessions are the recurrent thoughts. Compulsions are the repetitive behaviors. Again, in order for this to be a diagnosis and a disorder, it has to impair their ability to function. So let's start talking about them. OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder. This is obsessions and compulsions that are involuntary and unwanted and consume at least, this is important, at least 1 hour a day. An hour of their awake time a day is consumed with these obsessive compulsions and thoughts. Okay? These are very specific to the individual. There is not one that says all people with OCD are obsessed with this or have compulsive behaviors doing this. It's specific to the individual. It can be obsessive or compulsive about whatever. Some of the consequences of this disorder are they're more likely to lose close relationships, fail out in school, job loss, and have more health issues because of the stress. Who do you think it is more likely to affect, males or females? Females, we got a couple. What else? Okay. It affects more females than males in adulthood, but males are more likely to develop it in childhood. So they're both kind of right, depending on the timeline that you talk about. Males are more likely to develop it in childhood. Females are more likely to develop it in adulthood. Okay? All right, so body dysmorphic disorder. This is a preoccupation with perceived flaws or defects in an individual's physical appearance. This is probably not going to be apparent at all to other people. This is their own obsessive and compulsive actions, thoughts, and behaviors about themselves and the way they look. This would be an idea of like somebody says, oh, I'm not ripped, I don't have big muscles, but we clearly see like they look like a bodybuilder, but they're going to continually go and work on it and work on it and work on it because they feel like that they're not. They have these thoughts that they're not. This is going to lead to repetitive acts and behaviors like excessively exercising. It's going to take up 3 to 8 hours a day, these obsessive compulsions and thoughts. Okay, 3 to 8 hours a day. It's a big distinguishing factor.
That's interesting because I feel like today on social media, everyone's saying I have body dysmorphia.
Everyone says it. I was reviewing this lecture last night, and on TikTok last night, there was a guy talking about how he had body dysmorphic disorder, and he was obsessively exercising. I mean, you could tell he was clearly ripped and fit and loved fitness, but he was like, I don't see it. Like he was actually talking about it, and that's very real. I think it's so much more common now than it ever has been.
I agree. At the same time, sorry. But then I was thinking, like, I meant, like, people say it, but hearing you say that it's 3 to 8 hours
3
a day,
to 8 hours a day.
How many of these people are actually spending 3 to 8 hours a day? So I feel like it's kind of being thrown around.
Right. 3 to 8 hours a day, meaning like these obsessive thoughts, not letting them do what they want to, what they need to do or want to do. Most people that are serious body dysmorphic disorder are going to be in the gym a lot. I mean, a whole lot. It doesn't necessarily, I think it's better to understand it that way. You can have other things like constantly fixing your hair, like, having an obsession or compulsions about your hair has to be perfect. If one hair comes out to the side, you have to redo it so it's exactly perfect. That's another instance that it can be done. It's not necessarily just exercising. There's a lot of things, anything physical feature of your body. Yeah. Any other questions on that one? Jennifer, what were you going to say?
Before you made that example, I was going to say I feel like it would have to be diagnosed with anorexia.
It very well could be. It's hard to play those two side by side because anxiety or anorexia, this is what makes mental health so different, right? Because the signs and symptoms can be very similar, right? But the difference with this one is it stemmed from anxiety itself. Okay, remember, all of these are stemmed from anxiety regardless. And then they start performing obsessions or having obsessions and then performing compulsive behaviors. Does that make sense? So I can see where you're going at with that they would be comorbid, but I feel like body dysmorphic disorder is probably a more umbrella kind of term. Because a lot of people with body dysmorphic disorder aren't the super thin people that you see, they look physically fit and healthy like you wouldn't have guessed. When you think of anorexia, that's not what the look is, right? It's more thin, very bony, scrawny, body kind of.
They're following like a strict diet constantly with like broccoli or
Right.
rice. Like,
Right.
I feel like that would. I mean, I don't know what category.
I would agree. I would.
I don't know.
No, I see what you're saying. I get why that would be confusing, but the difference with this too is not just the eating aspect; it's all the physical features. So they may even do like plastic surgery to look certain ways. I was getting ready to get some of those other things like even like excessive skin picking. Like they feel like some area on their body is not good, so they'll like constantly pick at it to see if they can get it to be what they think. There's a lot more that goes into body dysmorphic than just anorexia itself. There's more physical features and more things that they do. Make sense? Cool. So listed that. Another thing is they're at high risk to use steroids. And it's going to limit a lot of social functioning. They're going to have very limited time to engage in social interactions. They're more worried about themselves and their appearance than anything else. Okay? All right, hoarding disorder. This is having difficulty or persistent difficulty in discarding possessions. Okay, we've all probably seen an episode of Hoarders before and how, real of a disorder that is. Needing to store used pizza boxes for 15 years and you just can't throw them away because you feel like you'll need them one day. I mean, this is real. And being out in home health, it's very real. Some stuff you see is pretty crazy. Hoarding disorder, this is just personal opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. I feel like it stemmed from the older generation who went through the Depression, who you used everything, no matter what it was. The box that the cheese came in, the government cheese came in, you used it to store things. Like you just didn't have money, you used everything possible. And now I feel like we're seeing that more and more as this population ages. They're getting ready to age out. These people are older, but this is when you see their houses and they've got these, and then they've stemmed into their kids too. A lot of them have the same hoarding behaviors. Don't throw anything away. I don't care if that's not, you can make something with that. That's another thing. I actually have a friend who I believe has hoarding disorder. He's probably not diagnosed with it, but I feel like he does. And he collects cigarette packets, used cigarette packets. He smokes like a freight train. And they used to, long ago, give you money for those. It was like $0.25 a packet. You turned them back in, they recycled them, made new cigarette packets. They don't do that anymore. They haven't done that in a really, really long time. But he still keeps them. And he lives in a camper, and he has got them stacked up everywhere. I mean, I've never been to his camper for that reason, but he has a heart of gold. He just has these obsessive compulsive disorders that he has to hoard everything.
Does he openly talk about it?
Oh, yeah. He's very open. Very open about it. He's not afraid to tell anybody. It just is. He also, for a long time, he lived in his car. And then we talked him into living in a camper because it was just better.
Yeah.
He just feels like he's going to need it one day. Like he can't get rid of things. He has to. I'm going to need that. I will say that if there is an item that you feel like you need that's hard to find, he probably has it. That's true. He does, and I feel like he prides himself on that. But like, I couldn't find this certain tool that I needed, for my car. He's like, dude, I have one of those, and he has it. And the very limited space he has one. But the problem, or what makes this a disorder here, is again, it's going to impact daily occupation and safety is a big one with this one. And they're also not going to recognize that their hoarding is excessive, that it's not really a problem. They're going to have, if you go to try to throw something of theirs away, that causes huge distress to them. I mean, so much anxiety to them that you're getting rid of their things. There is no better example than the Hoarders TV show. If you want to know more what it looks like, go watch an episode of that and you're like, wow, I see why this is a disorder. A subcategory of that is animal hoarding. This is where someone accumulates a large number of animals, cats, dogs, and then when it becomes this disorder is when they're unable to take care of them and the animals are now malnourished. It's not sanitary. They can't afford veterinary care. Just because somebody has 10 dogs does not mean they have animal hoarding disorder. They might just really, really like dogs. Okay. When the dogs are malnourished and they're, it's a gross house, there's sanitary issues, safety issues, then it's animal hoarding disorder. Okay. It is. Our former director, Kay, ran a dog sanctuary, I guess is what she would house dogs until they were adopted to keep them from getting euthanized. And she would have 20, 15, 20 dogs all the time. None of the dogs weren't, they weren't, they didn't always look the best. They weren't always perfectly groomed and stuff like that, but they were healthy. The house was not, that's not animal hoarding. Somebody has 20 dogs, 15, 20 dogs, and you go in and there's like dog poop all over the floors and, flies. It's just nasty sanitary issues. That's animal hoarding. Farmers will become like this. A lot of times you'll see, farmers are unable to say they're not necessarily have hoarding or animal hoarding disorder, but you'll see like their horses and stuff that they've had forever. They're unable to take care of them the way that they should be now. They're malnourished. People will accuse them of having animal hoarding disorder too, but they're not. They're just like, they're my animals. So that's a funny one to play back and forth. You really have to. I think when it becomes extremely obvious is when it becomes a disorder. That's when you say, wow, this person probably has like 30 cats in their house and they all are flea ridden and, they call animal rescue.
There was a guy in Ripley who was the one that animal hoarder, like,
Mm-hmm.
he hoarded snakes. Like big snakes.
In Ripley? Oh, that's terrifying.
Yeah, it was our gym teacher's son.
Ooh.
How many snakes do you have?
I'll try and find the video.
Ew. He was the one hoarding show?
Yeah.
Really? That's fun. Find the link. I want to watch it. All right. Trichotillomania and excoriation disorder. Trichotillomania is the excessive or the compulsive behavior of pulling out your own hair, resulting in hair loss. I have videos, so be warned today.
What about eyelashes?
Yeah, okay. The full shebang.
But like just your eyelashes.
Hair.
I feel like
Any hair.
About her eyelashes all the time.
Ooh.
Yeah, it shouldn't happen.
Okay.
But so that would be the disorder?
She has that? We don't diagnose.
Oh.
It would take a psychiatrist. So yeah, nah. I'm not about that life. Excoriation is a repetitive skin picking that results in skin lesions. This could be another one where you talked about like comorbid diagnosis, the body dysmorphic. They result in skin picking. The difference that makes it into excoriation disorder is when they get lesions and sores and stuff on their body from skin picking so much. Okay. All right, there's a good overview of all those. All right, so what causes this stuff? The biggest one is stress. That is the most common cause of developing a anxiety disorder or OCD related disorder. Stress itself has its own syndrome called general adaptation syndrome. You're going to want to know about that. That's just being able to not adapt generally to different situations, and they cause stress to the body. When someone experiences stress over a long period of time, their central nervous system gets aroused. Major muscles of the body become, rigid or frozen, like they don't want to move. They go through this stage process with stress on how they're going to react. If it gets too severe, then it causes a anxiety and OCD related disorder. Okay. A genetic cause is there are twins demonstrate, a genetic link to it in twin studies, but there's no specific one. There is, and you definitely want to know this statistic, that there's a 20% higher rate that if someone in your family, immediate family, has an anxiety or OCD related disorder, that you will also develop one yourself. 20%. Pretty high number. Some like brain anatomy kind of stuff is the prefrontal amygdala helps manage our anxiety. So if I ask you on exam which area of your brain helps to manage anxiety, it's the prefrontal amygdala. Okay. Some other things are the regulation of pituitary glands. The prefrontal cortex plays a huge role in OCD behaviors. But overall, I mean, brain chemistry has a fairly large part to play in anxiety disorders because that's going to control how you react to situations anyway, right? How you think about things. Some chemical kind of stuff in your brain is serotonin can help, contribute to anxiety. Too high of serotonin levels. Stressful stimuli activate these hormones being sent out, and if your body sends out too much, if you have a higher level of cortisol, which is released in stressful situations. So if I ask you what brain chemical is released in stressful situations, you're going to tell me cortisol. Yeah. That's another big factor with anxiety disorders. So some cognitive and physiological factors is that in OCD behaviors, they elevate your anxiety levels. So it's kind of a catch-22 thing. The anxiety causes it, and then it raises your anxiety, and it, bounces back and forth. A lot of the times, your behaviors. So saying that you go and you have to make sure the stove is off. 3 or 4 times, it's your routine every day. You have to go check it 3 or 4 times, even up to 10, 15 times, whatever helps. Whenever you get to that point in your brain that serotonin is released and you're like, oh, okay, the stove is off. It gives that temporary relief to anxiety, but it's going to restart itself whenever the situation comes back up. Okay, so there is a relief when someone does a compulsive behavior. There's a anxiety release, but that doesn't mean it goes away. It's a very temporary release. Okay, cool. And then in some environmental factors, some people, one that's an outlier is the body dysmorphic disorder. There's statistics that show, like, if you were teased about your appearance in school and growing up, that you have a higher rate of developing body dysmorphic disorder. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will do it, or it increases the likelihood. There's just some statistics out there saying that makes you at a higher risk. Okay. Some other ones are your parents' temperament and style. The loss of parents is another one for anxiety disorders, like the separation ones that we talk about. And then overprotectiveness from a parent is another one that can help or assist in developing these disorders. Any questions so far? We've gone over quite a bit of information. I highly recommend you guys go back and read this chapter. There are so many YouTube videos about all these disorders. I mean, it would take you no time to go and do a quick search on YouTube to find personal experiences, people literally telling you every experience that they've had, things that have helped them. There's a lot of good information that I just simply can't fit into our lecture time. Okay. All right. So the prevalence for anxiety disorders. This is the most common mental disorder, is anxiety. This group is the most common. Okay. 30% of the population. It's the most prevalent disorder in adolescents. And then the most common ones in this group are panic disorder, social phobia, agoraphobia, and then GAD, the most common, generalized anxiety disorder. Okay. All right, so some gender and culture. Gender-specific factors for women put them at a higher risk for anxiety disorders. I think we mentioned a few of those a minute ago. What are some other things, like specific factors affecting women that make anxiety factors or anxiety more prevalent among women? Okay. I got you. No, I got you. Your book lists off a few of them. They say a socioeconomic disadvantage is an area that helps or assists. I keep saying helps. I mean to say assist in developing anxiety disorders. Gender-based violence is one. Subordinate social status, and then responsibilities to care for others. So, like you said, the taking care of their children kind of thing. All of this can help and assist in developing anxiety disorders. The burden of illness is a big one. In culture, being someone like in certain cultures, like in a lot of Chinese cultures, they don't even talk about what a nursing home is. Elders are very, respected. You take care of your family until they pass away, period. There is no, oh, I have to work. There's no excuse. You just do it, right? The burden for illness on them is, in a lot of instances, people consider it less because the whole family takes care of this person until they pass away. They don't send them to a facility. Now, in the United States, oh, grandma's going to a nursing home. It's almost like a normalized thought now, right? Not necessarily, I mean, every family has to do what's right for them and their family, but the burden of illness, the way we react to it is very different according to culture, right? Asian, African American, and Hispanic cultures are less likely than Caucasian Americans to meet anxiety disorder criteria. Why do you think that is? Okay. What else? Mr. Culture back there. Why do you think? Asian, African American, and Hispanic cultures are less likely than Caucasian Americans to meet anxiety disorder criteria. Why? Okay. Sure. I already told you with Asian culture, and the burden. I just think it's an interesting, that's just statistically, your book states it as a fact that, they're less likely. We'll talk a lot about healthcare in minorities and why there's a disparity and stuff like that later. I think we talk more about that next semester. But among these cultures, they're also less likely to reach out for healthcare due to a lot of issues. Distrust is a big one. But in this instance, if they're less likely to reach out for healthcare, they're also very unlikely to reach out for mental health care, even more so because of stigma, those kind of things. I think it's breaking down. This is something that takes time. Culture differences are huge. You have to use caution when interpreting research on culture differences and similarities because you have to be careful of biases. So if you do your own research, especially in the ones that I gave you guys, and there's a culture difference and stuff between, be very careful when you read that research. Make sure it's accurate research and not bias. Okay? Cool. There's another idea of called culture-bound syndrome. These are illnesses bound to a particular culture. I don't know any examples off the top of my head. Your book talks a little bit about some that are out there, but these are things that are only in our culture. Anxiety is not as prevalent in other countries because they don't recognize it as much of a disorder. So take that into account too when you're reading over different research studies and stuff too. All right. So what is the course? The age of onset varies for all of these diagnoses. There's no wide variety. The age where bullying really affects, so like elementary, middle school, high school ages, that really make someone at a greater risk for anxiety disorders. But the age for all of these is kind of all over the place. People can be diagnosed with these very early, very late. There's a lot of people that get diagnosed much later that had a lot of symptoms early on and just never sought help and it was never noticed. As we age, though, anxiety disorder stems from more illness and concerns about aging and disability. Just statistically showing if you ask people of older ages what is causing you anxiety, it is their health. It is what am I going to do? How's my family going to take care of them when they're gone? Those kind of things. We need to be, so why do we even care about it, is we need to be aware of early intervention and how much of a critical role that plays in helping someone with anxiety or OCD behaviors and all these other stuff. The more we can find triggering situations, things that cause anxiety, avoid those or find ways to cope with them in healthier methods, the better. I think that kind of carries over for most of what we've talked about. In Why are we concerned with mental health? Because we need to be aware of signs, symptoms, and treatments that are available to patients that have these disorders. Okay? Any questions so far? Are we still good? We've got 2 more slides and a few videos. We good? All right. So the impact on our occupational performance. We've covered a lot of that already, though. You know, it's going to affect your social. It's going to aspects. It's going to affect your work. It's going to affect your activities of daily life, your ideals. Every area of occupation is going to be affected. What is something specific that you can think about with some just anxiety disorders in general that might be different? Or just throw out some examples of activities of daily life or IDLs that might be affected with anxiety.
Social anxiety, getting out of bed and doing
Okay. What else? Maggie? Even grocery shopping might be affected, yeah. Sleep is a huge one. Very, very big. You know, someone struggling with anxiety a lot of times has a lot of sleep issues. One little thing I want you guys to remember here, write this down, is that we measure someone's quality of life based on their own sense of well-being. Okay? So if someone is clearly happy, you might say, listen, that's a compulsive behavior. This is not healthy, blah, blah, but they are not, it's not affecting their daily life. And they're perfectly happy. They have their own sense of well-being. They feel, would you call that a disorder or not? What are we concerned about? We're concerned about these people's quality of life, right? As long as they're safe and it's not affecting their daily life, you know, they might have these obsessive compulsive behaviors and they're affecting, you know, taking up an hour a day, but if they're able to function, they're able to pay their bills, they're able to keep their job down, is it really a disorder? Some people will even tell you that anxiety is a positive thing, that they work better in anxious stages of their life. The more anxiety that they have, the better that they function, the more they're able to get done. It's a very person by person basis, right? Yeah. All right, so interventions. You're going to want to know some of these medication names. Some that we use here are benzodiazepines, BENZODIAZEPINES, and antidepressants like SSRIs are generally used for anxiety disorders. Again, you know, the sexual dysfunction is a huge issue with these medications, and that'll make people not want to take them. They'd rather deal with the anxiety than deal with that side effect. The outlier here is those benzodiazepines are very short-term use. They're not considered like the first type of use. They're like a backup if the SSRIs don't work. Okay? Got me? ECT therapy is another one that helps with the reducing OCD behaviors and symptoms. I'm going to butcher this, but I'll give it my shot here. Repetitive transcranial electromagnetic stimulation. Wow, look at me go. I'm proud of myself there. Thank you. Thank you. This is the application of magnetic fields to areas of the brain. So it looks fairly similar to ECT, but it's used with magnetic waves rather than electric impulses. I've not been able to find a video of that one for you guys yet, but if you do, share it with me. Okay. And then deep brain stimulation. This is literally implanting electrodes into the patient's body, and they provide electrical stimulation to specific areas of the brain. Okay. In general, it's treated with medication. They do the other ones if the medication does not work, or if they want to assist the medication in working. But in general, that's what they do. Okay. Let's watch this YouTube video real quick on this is what OCD looks like through someone's eyes.
Okay, we wash once.
You hear that?
Twice. Three times. Wash 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 three times. Wash. Okay, we're good now. We just one more time. Wash three times. 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 It doesn't feel right. There's something on my hand. It feels heavy. Wash three times. Okay, it's better now. Okay, perfect. Hands feel so light. It's clean. Okay, first take off your shirt. Then take off your pants. Now put on pants first. And then pant shirt. You know, you can just put on a shirt after taking one off. You don't really need to take your pants off before. You. Oh no! What's this? Why is it there? I need to iron it. It's okay. Leave it. You don't have time. You need to leave for class now. You're going to be late. Oh, slow. to class. Careful now. Those are cracks. Head down. Avoid the cracks. Oh no. Okay, pause. Start again. Maintain pace. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Oh, hi. Oh, you go back to it now. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Don't rub your fingernails. Why are you rubbing your fingernails? Only these nails. Stop doing this. Start writing. What if on class? Stop rubbing your fingernails. Stop rubbing your fingernails. Oh, nice. You're so soft. It's smooth. This feels good.
So you can see like those obsessions that then turn into compulsive behaviors, like those thoughts, wash 3 times, wash 3 times, wash 3 times, wash 3 times, and then having to turn around and actually do it, and then can't get the thought out of your head, so you do it 3 more times. And you saw how effective that, or how much of an effect that took on our day from the time, right? Chapter, I think it's 14. I have some more videos for you guys. I think that is the same one. Let me double check. This is going to be really loud. Well, this is osmosis video. I'm going to show you guys this one first. So this is that trick. Oh no. They took my video. You spelled that right. Well, that sucks. That was a really good video. Huh. I'll try to find it again and send it to you guys. Man, that sucks. All right, we're going to watch the one on Crash Course. Like I said, it's just a general overview, and then you guys can be dismissed, okay?
This is the checkers game where grandson and granddad will bond. This is the kitchen where the new boyfriend will unfit.
Ever hear a really good joke about polio? Or maybe a casual reference to someone having hepatitis? Or maybe tease your buddy by saying he has muscular dystrophy? Of course you have never done that, because you are not a terrible person. You've never made fun of someone for having a physical illness. Alright, folks make all kinds of offhand remarks about people having mental illnesses and never give it a second thought. How often have you heard a person say that someone's psycho or schizo or bipolar or OCD? I can pretty much guarantee that the people who use those terms had no idea what they actually meant. So you talk about how psychological disorders and the people who have them have often been stigmatized, but at the same time, we tend to minimize those disorders, using them as nicknames for things that people do think or say that may not exactly be universal, but are still basically healthy. And we all do it, but only because we don't really understand those conditions. But that's why we're here, because as we go deeper into psychological disorders, we get a clearer understanding of their symptoms, types, causes, and the perspectives that help explain them. And some of the most common disorders have their roots in an unpleasant mental state that's familiar to us all, anxiety. It's a part of being human, but for some people it can develop into intense fear, paralyzing dread, and ultimately turn into full-fledged anxiety disorder. Defining psychological disorders again. A deviant, distrustful, dysfunctional pattern of thoughts, feelings, or behaviors that interferes with the ability to function in a healthy way. So when it comes to anxiety, that definition is probably called phobic because you didn't like Space Mountain as much as you did, and the person who truly can't leave their house for fear of interacting with others. Teased by her friends as being OCD because she does her laundry every night, and the girl who has to wash her hands so often that they bleed. Starting today, you're going to understand all those terms you've been using. We commonly equate anxiety with fear, but anxiety disorders aren't just a matter of fear itself. A key component is also what we do to get rid of that fear. Say someone almost drowned as a kid and is now afraid of water. A family picnic at the river may cause that anxiety to bubble up, and to cope, they may stay sequestered in the car, less anxious but probably still unhappy while the rest of the family is having fun. So in political terms, not only by distressing, persistent anxiety, but also often by the dysfunctional behaviors that reduce that anxiety. At least a fifth of all people will experience a diagnosable anxiety disorder of some kind at some point in their lives. That is a lot of us. So let's start out with a condition that used to be categorized as an anxiety disorder, but is now considered complex enough to be in a class by itself, obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. You probably know that condition is characterized by unwanted, repetitive thoughts, which become obsessions, which are sometimes accompanied by actions, which become compulsions. And it is a great example of a psychological disorder that could use some mental health myth busting. Being neat and orderly and fastidious does not make you OCD. OCD is a debilitating condition whose sufferers take normal behaviors like washing your hands or double-checking that you've turned off the stove and perform them compulsively. And they often use these compulsive, even ritualistic behaviors to relieve intense and unbearable anxiety. So soon they're scrubbing their hands every 5 minutes, or constantly checking the stove, or counting the exact number of steps they take everywhere they go. If you're still unclear about what it means for disorders to be deviant, distressful, and dysfunctional, OCD might help you understand. Because it is hard to keep a job, run a household, sit still, or do much of anything if you feel intensely compelled to run to the kitchen 20 times an hour. And both the thoughts and behaviors associated with OCD are often driven by a fear that is itself obsessive. Like, if you don't go to the kitchen right now, your house will burn down and your child will die, which makes the condition that much more distressing and self-reinforcing. There are treatments that help OCD, including certain kinds of psychotherapy and some psychotropic drugs. The key here is that it's not a prescription for your roommate who cleans her bathroom twice a week, or the guy who next to you who lets you green velvet pens. And even though OCD is considered its own unique set of psychological issues, the pervasive senses of fear, worry, and loss of control that often accompany it have a lot in common with other anxiety disorders. The broadest of these is generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD. People with this condition tend to feel continually tense and apprehensive, experiencing unfocused, negative, and out-of-control feelings. Of course, feeling this way occasionally is common enough, but feeling it consistently for over 6 months, the length of time required for a formal diagnosis, not. Folks with GAD worry all the time and are frequently agitated and on edge, but unlike some other kinds of anxiety, patients often can't identify what's causing the anxiousness, so they don't even know what to avoid. Then there's panic disorder, which affects about 1 in 75 people, most often teens and adults. Its common card is panic attacks, or sudden episodes of intense dread or sudden fear that come without warning. Unlike the symptoms of GAD, which can be hard to pin down, panic attacks are brief, well-defined, and sometimes severe bouts of elevated anxiety. And if you've ever had one or been with someone who has, you know that they call these attacks for good reason. They can cause chest pain, racing heartbeat, difficulty breathing, and a general sense that you're going crazy or even dying. It's as awful as it sounds. We talked a lot about the body's physiological fight or flight response, and that's definitely part of what's going on here, even though there often isn't an obvious trigger. There may be a genetic predisposition to panic disorder, but persistent stress or having experienced psychological trauma in the past can also set you up for these these attacks, and because the attacks themselves can be downright terrifying, a common trigger for panic disorder is simply the fear of having another panic attack. How's that for a kick in the head? Say you have a panic attack on a bus, so you find yourself hyperventilating in front of dozens of strangers with nowhere to go to calm yourself down. That whole ordeal might make you never want to be in that situation again, so your anxiety can lead you to start avoiding crowded or confined places. At this point, the initial anxiety has spun off into a fear of anxiety, which means, welcome, you've migrated into another realm of anxiety disorder, phobias. And again, this is a term that's been misused for a long time to describe people who say don't like cats or are uncomfortable on long plane trips. Simply experiencing fear or discomfort doesn't make you phobic. In clinical terms, phobias are persistent, irrational fears of specific objects, activities, or situations that also, and this is important, leads to avoidance behavior. You hear a lot about fears of heights or spiders or clowns, and those are real things. There are specific phobias that focus on particular objects or situations. For example, the Chesapeake Bay Bridge in Maryland is a 7,000-meter span that crosses the Chesapeake Bay. If you want to get to or from eastern Maryland, that's pretty much the only way to do it, at least in a car. But there are thousands of people who are so afraid of crossing that bridge that they simply can't do it. So to accommodate this avoidance behavior, driver services are available. For $25, people with gyrophobia, a fear of bridges, can hire someone to drive themselves and their kids and dogs and groceries across the bridge in their own car while trying not to freak out. Another phobia is lack of specific triggers. What we might think of as social phobia, currently known as social anxiety disorder, is characterized by anxiety related to interacting or being seen by others, which could be triggered by a phone call or being called on in class or just thinking about meeting new people. So you can probably see at this point how anxiety disorders are related and how they can be difficult to tease apart. The same thing can be said about what we think causes them. Because much in the same way that anxiety can show up as both a feeling like panic and a thought like, is my kitchen on fire, there are also two main perspectives on how we currently view anxiety as a function of both learning and biology. The learning perspective suggests that things like conditioning, observational learning, and cognition, all of which we've talked about before, best explain the source of our anxiety. Remember our behaviorist friend John B. Watson and his conditioning experiments with poor little Albert? By making a loud, scary noise every time he showed the kid a white rat, he ended up conditioning the boy object from bunnies to dogs to fur coats. That conditioning used two specific learning processes to cement itself in little Albert's young mind. Stimulus generalization expanded or generalized his fear of the rat to other furry objects. The same principle holds true if you were attacked by your neighbor's mean parrot and subsequently fear all birds. But then the anxiety is solidified through reinforcement. Every time you avoid or escape a fear situation, a pair of fuzzy slippers or a robin on the street, you ease your anxiety, which might make you feel better temporarily, but it actually reinforces your phobic behavior, making you stronger. Cognition also influences our anxiety, whether we interpret a strange noise outside as a hungry bear or a robber or merely the wind, determines if we roll over and keep snoring or freak out and run for a kitchen knife. And we might also acquire anxiety from other people through observational learning. A parent who's terrified of water may end up instilling that fear in their child by violently snatching away from kiddie pools or generally acting anxious around park fountains and duck ponds. But there are also equally important biological perspectives. Central selection, for instance, might explain why we seem more likely to fear certain potentially dangerous animals like snakes, or why fears of heights or closed-in spaces are relatively common. It's probably true that our more wary ancestors who have the sense to stay away from cliff edges and hissing serpents were more likely to live another day and pass along their genes. So this might explain why those fears can persist, and why even people who live in places without poisonous snakes would still fear snakes anyway. And then you got the genetics and the brain chemistry to consider. Research has shown, for example, that identical twins, those internal test subjects, are more likely to develop similar phobias even if they're raised apart. Some researchers have detected 17 different genes that seem to be expressed with various anxiety disorders. So it may be that some folks are just naturally more anxious than others, and they might pass on that quality to their kids. And of course, individual brains have a lot to say about how they process anxiety. Physiologically, people who experience panic attacks, generalized anxiety, or obsessive compulsions show over-arousal in the areas of the brain that deal with impulse control and habitual behaviors. Now, we don't know whether these irregularities cause the disorder or caused by it, but again, it reinforces the truism that everything that is psychological is simultaneously biological, and that holds true for many other psychological disorders we'll talk about in the coming weeks, many of which have names that you've also heard being misused in the past. Today, you learned what defines an anxiety disorder as well as the symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and
All right. Do you have any questions for me today?
What do you think about, because I've heard this